Hello there. Welcome to the College Investor Audio Show. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today. So, there's this new Department of Education rule that makes accreditors prove degrees are worth the cost. We are going to take a deep dive into this. And if you want to dive even deeper, find links and articles and resources, it's all at thecollegeinvestor.com. Like, follow, click all the buttons on socials, search for The College Investor. You'll find us. We'd love to help you and get to know you better. All right, here we go with this topic now, this new rule. The job hasn't changed, but the degree required to get it has. So, over the past 3 decades, one profession after another has raised its educational entry price. You may have noticed. A bachelor's became a master's became a doctorate, a short training course became a year of mandatory classes, right? These new requirements are adding years of tuition, and of course, money, and borrowing for careers that pay roughly what they paid before the new requirements were added. So what gives? The labor market simply doesn't pay more just because you got more education. Am I right? I'm right. Economists call it degree inflation. It's ridiculous. And the most surprising part isn't actually the cost either. It's who decides what's required. In many licensed fields, get this, the degree you must buy is not set by Congress or even your state legislature. It's set by private organizations most Americans have never heard of, accrediting agencies. And they like money. And because of how the higher education system is wired, a single change by one of these groups can raise the required degree standards for an entire profession in all 50 states, all at the same time, with no election, no hearing in your statehouse, and no vote. Your voice is not heard. That system is now squarely in Washington's crosshairs. Good. The Department of Education's Negotiated Rulemaking Committee reached a consensus on May 21st of 26 on some new regulations that would put a stop to this practice. Look, say what you want about Linda McMahon, about the Department of Education as a whole, but this is a win in my book, and we're going to champion this cause. The department had named credential inflation as an explicit target when it launched the committee in January. To understand why that matters for your family's college costs, you first have to understand a system that almost nobody outside higher education even knows exists. Okay. Here's a quick snapshot of how the college accreditation system actually works. Here's the part that surprises most people. The federal government has nothing to do with accreditation. No government agency inspects your university and certifies its quality. That job belongs to private, nonprofit accrediting agencies, which are membership organizations run largely by colleges and professions they oversee. Is there a conflict of interest here? The Department of Education then recognizes accreditors it deems reliable, and that recognition is the master switch for federal money. A college can only offer federal student aid, Pell Grants, federal student loans, that type of thing, if it's accredited by a recognized agency. No accreditation, no federal aid. And for most schools, no viable business. This is why accreditors are called gatekeepers. They stand between $100 billion a year in federal student aid and the schools that so desperately want it. Okay, there are 2 layers here. Institutional accreditors, names like the Higher Learning Commission or the SAC, SCOC, approve entire colleges. Programmatic accreditors approve individual programs within them. The pharmacy school, the nursing program, the occupational therapy department, those types of things. These programmatic agencies are typically founded by and housed next to the professional associations of the fields they oversee. Then comes the final link in the chain, and it's the one that turns a private standard into public law. State licensing boards. So when your state licenses pharmacists or physical therapists, for instance, it almost never writes its own educational requirements. It just requires graduation from an accredited program. That one phrase outsources the state's judgment to the private accreditor. So when an accreditor decides to raise the entry degree for a profession, every state's licensing requirement rises with it automatically, with no legislature ever taking a vote and no citizen ever having a say. Let's take a look at degree inflation in action. Here are just a few examples of inflation of this kind, degree inflation. Okay, physical therapy. Physical therapy is the cleanest example of the whole machine at work. Check this out. All right, rewind 10 and a half years. In January 2016, the field's accreditor, CAPTE, made the Doctor of Physical Therapy the required degree for every accredited entry-level program. Because states license new PTs only from accredited programs, the bachelor's and master's pathways that trained generations of therapists are no longer offered anywhere in the country. Everyone already licensed was grandfathered. That's at least good, which is why the staff page at a typical clinic still shows PT, MPT, and DPT credentials side by side. 3 different degree levels, 1 license, the same patients, the same work, and essentially the same pay. How does that make any sense? The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports a single median wage for the occupation, and industry salary guides are blunt that what moves a PT's paycheck is experience, specialty, setting, and location, not degree level. That mixed roster is degree inflation made visible. The practitioners themselves are proof the job could be done and is still done every day without the degree now required to enter it. The change did not reflect on anyone in the field. It just made it more expensive to become a PT without moving the paycheck on the other side. Shouldn't there be a higher ROI? Yeah. Let's take a look at pharmacy. This is a good one. Pharmacy had the same thing happen. So pharmacists used to enter the field with a 5-year Bachelor of Science. But then the accreditor just was like, no, we'll force everyone to the Doctor of Pharmacy degree. The Chronicle of Higher Education flagged both fields as credential creep back in 2007. Almost 20 years ago, people. Occupational therapy, another one. It's facing this crisis right now, too. So in August of 2017, the field's accreditor, ACOTE, mandated that every master's program convert to a doctorate in 27. That's next year. The backlash was immediate, too. Practicing therapists, employers, educators pointed out there was no outcome data showing that doctorate holders got better jobs or pay than master's graduates doing identical work. After 2 years of internal conflict, the mandate was rescinded in 2019, and the master's path survived. But the reversal came from member revolt, not because of any law. And a whole bunch of universities converted their programs to the pricier doctorate anyway. Arg. Nursing. Man. And we have a nursing shortage. Why are we doing this stuff? It's ridiculous. Anyway, nursing is facing the same pressure, okay? However, the main pressure is actually coming from states who are making it more expensive to become a nurse. New York's BSN and 10 law, enacted in 2017, requires new nurses to earn a bachelor's within 10 years of licensure. North Dakota once required a BSN outright, but went ahead and repealed it in 2003 amid a nursing shortage. Duh. All right, let's take a look at accounting. The accounting profession's 150-hour rule, which forced CPA candidates into effectively a 5th year of college, was adopted state by state at the urging of the profession's National Association. However, it's now being dismantled, with Ohio first in January 2025 and more than 30 states after that, with pathways that swap the extra year of school for an extra year of work experience. Wow, you mean common sense? California's new law eliminates the 150-unit requirement outright. Thank you, Lord. Cosmetology. At the certificate level, the numbers get grim. This is bad. Certificate programs like cosmetology are one of the most impacted degrees on the low-earning degree list that would ban federal student loans. And you can see how licensing issues make this degree so expensive. Every state licenses cosmetologists. Completing the required classes costs more than $16,000 on average. Students borrow over $7,300 to do it on average. Cosmetology courses generate the fifth largest share of student loan borrowers of any program in the country. No joke. Half of workers in many states earn under $30K per year. Also no joke. This is all for a job that many of the workers have been doing themselves since they were teens. Here's the craziest stat. The training to become a cosmetologist averages about a year of coursework, compared with roughly a month for an EMT. You know, the person who responds when you call 911 to save your life. Random employer requirements. So employers add their own layer too. A Harvard Business School analysis of 26 million job postings found that 67% of postings for production supervisors demanded a bachelor's degree, while only 16% of the people already doing that job had one. A follow-up FREOPP analysis later found a partial degree reset, with requirements dropping from millions of postings in the last several years. Here's what the new rule does. The new regulatory language from the Department of Education's Accreditation, Innovation, and Modernization, AIM, negotiated rulemaking goes after the accreditors directly. The consensus text says a recognized accrediting agency may not act to restrict access to employment in a profession, occupation, or vocation unless it presents clear and convincing evidence to the Secretary of Education that the restriction is necessary to protect the public, that the expected public benefits outweigh the costs of reduced access to the profession, and that no less restrictive alternative is going to work. The rule then defines restricting access in exactly the terms that describe the last 30 years of degree inflation, taking steps to increase credentialing standards and increasing the cost or level of required education or training. So the rule also adds firewalls to attempt to keep affiliated associations from steering the accreditor's decisions through the people it appoints and the money it controls, turning a supposedly, independent quality check into the profession's own gatekeeping arm. Programmatic accreditors must be separate and independent from their affiliated professional associations. Good. It's about time. Separately elected decision-makers, separate dues, an independently set budget, public representatives making up at least 1/7 of the decision-making body, mandatory conflict of interest controls, public disclosure of all association relationships, and even physically separate offices. All common sense practices. How have they been getting away with not doing these things for 30 years? Meeting these requirements would now become conditions of federal recognition, and if an accreditor raises a degree requirement without clearing the evidence bar risks, it's going to lose its recognized status, or at least risk it, which in turn would stop the federal financial aid pipeline for all of its schools. Because the committee reached consensus, the department is bound to use this agreed text in its rule, which would take effect July 1st of 27. However, higher education groups expect legal challenges before then. What these new rules won't fix. All right, it's important to note that degree inflation can happen 3 ways: with accreditors, state laws, and employers. These new rules only impact accreditors. State legislatures and licensing boards remain free to raise requirements on their own. As such, the rule doesn't even touch BSN and 10 or cosmetology hour mandates. The rule even mentions it explicitly. Accreditors are permitted to align their standards with state licensure requirements, industry standards, employer hiring practices. So the pressure to raise credentials actually doesn't vanish. It simply relocates the state to state legislatures, where professional associations have to win the fight in public, state by state, instead of just once at the accreditor. However, conflict of interest and all the things, it's going to be slower for any state legislature to be able to pass anything anyway. So this is kind of more of a win. This makes the entire process to increase degree requirements slower, more visible. That's the whole point of the thing. Employer degree preferences and job postings are also entirely outside the rule's reach. Accreditors that never seek federal recognition, such as Business Education's AACSB, operate outside this system altogether as well. Here's what this means for your family. Okay, after all that. Every time an agency increases the entry-level degree requirement, it has the same impact. More years of tuition, more student loan borrowing, potentially, and more years of delayed full earnings, all for the same job at the same pay, roughly. This rule arrives at the same moment as another force pushing in the same direction. The graduate borrowing caps in the OBBBA, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which took effect, of course, earlier this summer. Grad Plus loans are gone for new borrowers. Graduate students are capped at $20,500, $100K total in federal loans. Professional students are at $50K per year, $200K total. The collision with degree-inflated fields is already measurable. According to a peer center analysis we covered in April, 63% of physical therapy borrowers currently take out more than the new limits allow, one of the highest rates of any graduate field. And the doctorate-holding physical therapists at the center of the story were initially excluded from the higher $200K professional tier under the department's definition, a fight that has already produced a 23-state lawsuit and an injunction temporarily allowing the higher limits. So in other words, the accreditor required the doctorate to begin with, and now the federal loan system may not allow students to finance it. Together, these two policies squeeze degree inflation from both ends. Number one, the accreditation rule limits how much education can be required. Number two, the student loan caps limit how much required education can be financed. A program that stretches to a doctorate now faces students who literally cannot borrow enough federal money to pay for it. And a separate provision in the same rulemaking pushes accreditors to judge programs on their economic returns relative to total cost using federal earnings data. This means that a long, expensive credential that doesn't pay off becomes an accreditation liability rather than a revenue strategy. There's a flip side that families should watch out for, too. The new student loan limits without cheaper programs could simply push borrowers into private loans. And our analysis of why private lenders cannot fill this gap found that credit requirements alone would exclude over 40% of potential borrowers. Okay, here's the optimistic scenario, though. Shorter, cheaper pathways into licensed professions depends on schools and accreditors actually responding to the new incentives rather than shifting costs onto students. Let's hope the optimist in us realizes this second scenario. All right, and that is our show for today. I know it was a longer one than usual, but a lot of great information for you to dive into at thecollegeinvestor.com. Links, resources, everything there. Ask questions, too, on socials. Click all the buttons. You'll find us pretty much anywhere you are. Just type in the words, The College Investor. We'd love to connect with you. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for stopping by, and we'll talk to you again real soon.